Hey guys! Okay, so today we're going to talk about taxonomy, which is a fancy word for classification. So basically grouping things into different groups. So we're going to be talking about grouping different species into different classifications, so different groups. So to start off, we're going to do something kind of different. You're going to classify different things in the room. So on the top of the notes, you're going to do this activity. First thing you're going to do is write down any 15 things in the room. They can be things on the wall, things on the floor, people, living things, not living things. Second thing you're going to do is classify. You're going to think to yourself and write down how are some of these things alike and how are they different. Based on that, the third thing you're going to do is divide the objects or things into two different categories. Once they're in two categories, you're going to divide those categories into two groups, each of similar things, so sort of like subgroups within each category. Then you're going to create labels for your groups. You'll have 4 groups total. So let's take, for example, I wanted to write down some things in the room. I wrote down smartboard, pen, pencil, students, teacher, stink bugs, spiders, and books. Let's say I had those things. I could say for how they're alike and different, some are living, some are non-living. Some of them are insects, some of them are animals, some of them are used for school, some of them are not. So for dividing into two categories, based on that, I could say, okay, 2 categories, living and non-living. Now I want to divide my categories into 2 groups. So for my living, I could do 2 groups of teachers and students, or I could do 2 groups of mammals and insects. And then for my non-living, I could try to come up with groups like writing utensils for pen, or writing utensils, and then my second group could be books or learning materials. So books and smartboard would go in that group. Okay, so that's an example. Pause this video now and take time to do that activity on the top of your notes. Take about 2 or 3 minutes to complete that. When you're done, you can press play again with this video and continue on with the notes. Okay, this is meant to help you understand classifying things, how to put things into different groups based on how similar they are. You'll also find that it's actually hard. You could come up with a lot of different ways to put things into groups. There's not just one right answer. Okay, so here's the formal definition of classification. It's the systematic grouping of organisms based on shared characteristics. So just like you did with that warm-up activity, you were grouping different things into certain categories based on how similar they were. You were just trying to figure out, okay, how similar are these things? Can I put them in the same group or not? That's classification. Okay. So taxonomy is this branch of biology that actually does this grouping. It does this classification. It names and groups organisms based on shared characteristics. So there are some scientists who have devoted their whole lives to figuring out how similar are different species to each other. Can I put them in a similar group? So just grouping different organisms so that we've got some sort of system to understand how similar or different organisms are. So one thing that's really important for this is when scientists discover unfamiliar organisms, they need a system to place that organism in. So they'll use this classification system to figure out, okay, what kind of species could this organism be? Does it fit with a current species, or is it something new? I mean, the whole reason we have different species is from taxonomy, putting together organisms that are so similar to each other or so different from each other that we could call them the same species or not. Okay, now you're going to fill in your pyramid on your notes. At the top, you're going to put the word domain, and then you're going to keep continuing down. This is the pyramid of taxonomy, and we're going to go through each part of this pyramid. The pyramid moves from general bigger categories of animals to more specific categories of animals. Like you see at the bottom, species is at the bottom because that's a very specific category of organisms. In fact, all the organisms are very, very similar to each other in the same species. Whereas domain is a huge category and includes lots and lots of different species. So the way the pyramid works is it goes from more general to more specific, or more general big categories to smaller groups of organisms. So it goes domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And again, we're going to go through each one of these and write next to each word an example of the category so that you'll understand this pyramid better. So take time to fill out the pyramid with each of these words. Okay, now you're going to fill the line next to the pyramid in with examples of each category. So we're going to start with kingdom. Domain is like this huge category. We're going to move to kingdom, okay? So birds and snails, they're actually in the same category of kingdom. They're in the same kingdom. Do they have anything in common? Well, we could say, yeah, okay, they have something in common. They're both animals. So because of that, they belong to the same kingdom, animals, instead of plants or instead of bacteria. Plants and bacteria would be different kingdoms, different categories. So snails and birds are in the same kingdom because they have something in common. They're both animals, okay, instead of other kingdoms. So you're going to write birds and snails. They're both animals for kingdom. They're in the same kingdom. The next category is class. So here's an example. Tigers and moose belong to the same class. Okay, they're both in the class of mammals. So what do they have in common? They're both air-breathing mammals. So because of that, we put them in the same class. Okay, again, we're looking for more and more things that are similar and specific to the two animals. Okay, so besides being animals, so they're in the same kingdom, they're also in the same class because they're air-breathing mammals. Okay, the next group is order. So dogs and tigers are in the same order, Carnivora. So what do they have in common besides being animals, besides being mammals? They also have similar food sources. They eat meat. Carnivores eat meat, okay? So that's something else they have in common. They eat meat, yet they're also still very different from each other. So they're just in the same order. They're not the same species. See how we're going from general, bigger groups of animals to a very specific group of animal. So dogs and tigers are in the same order because they have a little more in common. Not just mammals, not just air-breathing mammals, but they're also carnivores, so they eat meat. Okay, the next category is family. So panda bears and brown bears, two types of bears, they're in the same family because they're very similar to each other. They're not the same species, so they're not completely similar to each other, but they have a lot more in common than a tiger and a dog. Okay, so we call them to be in the same family. So there's still differences between them, but they're also a lot more similar than the tiger and the dog. So we put them in the same family. Again, getting more and more similar as we go down the pyramid. Okay, the next one is genus. So genus are very similar. Animals in the same genus are very similar to each other. So let's take this example, house cats on the left and wild cats on the right. They're in the same genus. They are very, very similar to each other. They're almost in the same species, but because of their environments, they're not quite exactly the same in terms of structure, so we can't call them in the same species. But they're so close to each other in terms of looks and characteristics, so we call them to be in the same genus. So not only are they in the same kingdom and phylum and class, order and family, they're also in the same genus. Okay, then we can get to species. So this is the exact same type of dog, domestic dog, okay? That's a species. There are subspecies in the dogs, okay? But, like different breeds, but they're all in the same species of dog. Okay, very similar structures, pretty much really, really similar to each other, even if they look a little different with different breeds. Dogs are in the same species, any kind of dogs in the same species. Okay, the last part of the notes for today is going to talk about something we talked about on Monday called the evolutionary tree. So an evolutionary tree helps scientists see how organisms are related and if we can put organisms in the same kingdom, in the same class. Okay, so it basically shows relationships between organisms through a tree. It's sort of like a family tree. The key thing is this third bullet point. The closer the organisms are on the tree, the more closely related they are. So the more similar they are and the more related they are. So we've seen this tree from Monday. Any organisms that are very close to each other and on the same branch of the tree are closely related to each other. So like we said on Monday, the herding dog and the hound dog are very similar to each other instead of the herding dog and the working dog because they're on opposite sides of the branch. So the ones that are closest to each other are most similar to each other, have the most similar characteristics. Okay, the last thing you're going to do on your notes sheet is you're going to create a mnemonic device. A mnemonic device is like a memory device. So you're going to create some sort of way for you to remember the order of these groups. So domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So my example here is, does King Philip clean out for garage sales? Okay, you're going to take each letter of each word and put it into your own memory device, sort of like the Does King Philip one. So take time on your note sheet to figure out a mnemonic device, a memory device, to remember the order of that pyramid.